So here's a kickoff question for us. What makes your body move? I heard oxygen. Tell me about oxygen. How does oxygen play a role in making our bodies move? I'm sorry? We live off of it, absolutely. So our cells need oxygen just to work. And without oxygen, we couldn't do anything, let alone move. What else?
Music.
Music. Tell me more about that.
Like, if you hear a good song, you go and start dancing.
Yeah, movement is about the environment, the social environment, what's around you makes your body move. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say stimuli.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Shannon said, like different stimuli and like an environment could cause your body to like move or react.
Okay, so we have a stimulus outside the body.
Your organ system, your skeletal structure, tissues, etc.
Oh, you just gave me a lot there. Talk a little bit more, break that down. So you started with the organ system.
So different organs are responsible for different things, and there are certain organs that you cannot live without. For example, heart, and as Sam said, that pumps like blood through your body and involves with oxygen, etc.
Right. Okay. So you're talking about the mechanics of how we move. Awesome. What else?
Your nervous system.
Your nervous system. All right. Now we're starting to make some connections.
It like sends brain signals to your brain that like commands your body to do whatever you want to do.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry. Okay. So we're building lots of connections at different levels here. Go ahead.
Your mRNA, it like tells like your cells in your body to do different activities.
All right, so we've got genetic information, we've got your nervous system, we've got your skeletal system, we've got the joints that connect all of those, we've got oxygen that makes it all work, and then we've got stimuli like even music in the outside environment that makes us want to move. That is awesome. So you guys really hit the main points here of thinking about how we start in the brain. So we start with the brain, thinking about how we make decisions to move. This is all about our voluntary movement, right? So whether it's music or some other sort of external stimulus that makes us decide to move. And then we talked about the nervous system, how that travels through the skeletals and the muscle system, through your spinal cord that actually makes you move with the oxygen. So you guys did a great job covering all of the different systems that are involved in something as simple as making our body move. But we really just talked about the muscles moving. Can you think of other ways that our bodies move that don't involve our muscles? Energy? Tell me more about what you mean by that. Okay, let's hold that thought, because we know that it definitely takes energy to move, and that's going to be important. Yeah?
I would say electrolytes.
Electrolytes? What do you mean, what are you thinking of?
Like, you know how somebody drink like a Red Bull and like they're really super tired or like for studying, so like it makes the brain work so hard and it usually does.
Sure, so maybe we can have stimulus from thinking about nutrition as another way of making our muscular system move. Okay, great.
I would say like how your temperature changes throughout your body. So like the heat might be like moving, like leaving the body or entering.
Oh, that's a really interesting idea, right? So when you think about, for example, what happens when something gets warm, let's think about like ice, for instance, or water, right? As it gets warmer, what happens to it? It boils, becomes a gas. As it's colder, it becomes solid, right? So temperature changes the way that the molecules are moving. So that's something to keep in mind as something else that makes our muscles move. Or sorry, not our muscles, our elements in our body move. What else? Yeah.
Like when it's cold outside and you're shivering, I guess
Yeah, so that's actually a way that temperature makes your muscles actually move, right? That you start shivering to try and generate energy, which brings us back to your idea, right? So we're starting to see how all of these systems work together, both inside our body and outside the body, and how they talk to each other. So I'm going to throw out some other examples for you. So we talked about kind of voluntary motion when your brain is talking to your muscles. We also have involuntary motion of your heart muscle. Your heart muscle is just constantly beating. It doesn't need your brain to signal it to move. Does anybody know what makes our heart muscle move? So blood flow moves through the heart, but the actual muscle.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Isn't a heart considered like a big muscle?
It is a muscle, but its contraction isn't controlled by the brain.
Oh.
Yeah.
Isn't it like an electric pulse?
Yeah. It's got electrical control. That's right in the heart muscle. So it doesn't need your brain to move. It pulses just by the electrical stimulation that's in the heart. Good. What about hearing? Anybody know about how we hear and why that has to do with physical motion?
Good.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say cause like when you hear stuff, sound waves hit your eardrum, it just causes it to vibrate.
Right. So when sound waves hit your ear, it makes your eardrum vibrate, right? That's movement too. Yeah.
Doesn't the amount of vibrations change how you hear?
Absolutely, right? So the frequency of vibration, it determines the pitch. And your ear is actually organized so that different parts of your ear are sensitive to different frequencies, and that gets translated to your brain. All right, in the middle, these are immune cells. Why do you think immune cells might need to move in your body? Yeah.
So they can find a new virus.
Yeah, so they're kind of moving around trying to look for things to defend your body against. This is a developing embryo. Think about what happens when you start from 1 cell to 2 cells to 4 cells. What kind of movement happens there? Yeah.
Cell division.
Cell division, and then things have to change shape, right? So all of those cells, as they're dividing, they need to move to where they need to go so that your heart cells come to the heart and your ear cells go to your ear. And then even just something as simple as getting a paper cut, right? Or any kind of a wound. Your body has to fix itself, right? So you have cells that are moving into that wound to heal it. So all of these are ways that your body is moving and pushing and experiencing different physical forces in ways that our brain doesn't control. And so all of these help us understand how our bodies grow and change and sense the environment and then change the environment back. So I wanted to show just a couple of quick videos that'll help us visualize what some of these So this is a fruit fly embryo. So all of these little white dots are cells that are nuclei that are tagged in the cells with a fluorescent dye. So you can see how as this embryo is developing, these cells are moving and changing and organizing themselves in ways that will eventually give rise to, which side do you think is the head? It's actually up here. So watch as it starts to just fold in on itself. And so this is actually taken through a really cool type of live microscopy where you can tag these cells in a living fly embryo and then just watch it over time to see what's happening. And the reason it's getting kind of shaky at the end here is because now the muscle cells have developed. So now the muscles are starting to kind of push and pull, and that creates that kind of jerky motion that you see in the video. All right, let's look at another example. We don't always think about plants being super active, but if you watch them over time, plants have a lot of motion too. What kind of stimuli, like, I don't know if plants really respond to music, but what kind of environmental stimuli might plants respond to in their motion? Yeah.
Fear.
I'm sorry?
Wait, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing.
Okay.
I'm thinking this is, sorry.
Yeah, no, what do you think? What kind of environmental stimuli do plants respond to?
We mean voluntary and involuntary.
I'm sorry?
I said voluntary and involuntary.
Either.
I was gonna say wind.
Wind? Sure, yeah. So thinking about, voluntary is sort of interesting when you think about plants, right? Because they don't really have a brain, but what are they sensitive to? So wind might be something that, on one hand, like it's blowing over, but maybe that force, it activates pathways to like make the plant, more stiffer from the inside.
I said water.
Water, sure, yeah. Well, we can look at water. What else?
The environment, so basically how much sunlight they get, the type of soil they grow into, and like the surrounding, like what kind of animals like live nearby, etc.
Yeah, so sun, soil, things like that. All right, let's watch one more video. So we were talking about how immune cells need to move around. This is a really cool video because this is actually work from scientists who design immune cells to go seek out cancer cells. So if anybody has ever heard of immunotherapy as a treatment for cancer,
this is a video made by my colleague Martin Glenn.
So in a minute. So you'll see that these white arrows are pointing to cancer cells, and the pink arrow is pointing to an immune cell that's going to go on the move here. And it finds a cancer cell because it's tagged with these markers that recognize cancer cells, and it goes and basically eats up that cancer cell. And then once it's done with that, it'll go and head to the next cancer cell and eat that up. And so this is a really cool way to think about how we can treat cancer early without having to do chemotherapy and radiation, just by designing your own immune cells to go seek out and destroy cancer cells. Okay, so all of these ways in which we think about the physical properties and how living things move and push and pull and respond to different forces is this new field of science that's called mechanobiology. So what words do you recognize in mechanobiology? Because that's a big word, yeah. Mechano, what does that mean to you?
Mechanics.
Mechanics, what other words?
Like mechanical engineering.
So mechanical engineering, what else? Yeah.
Biology.
Biology, what does that mean?
Study of life.
The study of life. Okay, so we've got like mechanics, which you're thinking about like engineering, and then biology, which is a study of life. All right, well, let's put those two together. We think about engineering and machines and physical forces. And so mechanobiology together, you put those things, put those roots together, is thinking about how physical forces change living things. And what's really cool about this field is it actually brings together all of these things. So we've got biology, chemistry, physics, engineering, medicine. It's all of this kind of comes together in thinking about observing and understanding how those physical forces are changing living things, but also how we can design and actually develop new technologies that rely on those physical forces and manipulate and change them to help people. So we're going to do this two-part workshop. So today we're mostly going to focus on the mechanobiology of cells. So thinking about what's happening at really, really tiny scales, often for, in ways that we don't even think about what's happening. And then next week, we're going to be doing mechanobiology at the organism level. So I mentioned that we are collaborating with researchers at University of Pennsylvania for this. So it's part of a group called the Center for Engineering Mechanobiology. And what we're going to be studying in this week and next week really relates to all the cool stuff that researchers from CPMB are working on. And the reason that the Franklin Institute is involved is because we are in the middle of designing a mini exhibit station about mechanobiology that should be arriving in like 2 or 3 weeks. We just missed it. But STEM scholars in past years actually helped us determine the content for this exhibit based on what we learned and discussed in workshops like this. So that's really cool. And then next week, you saw on your survey that you're going to be doing a Venus flytrap workshop. So just to get you excited, next week you'll be working with actual plants and thinking about how to measure the signals that make Venus flytraps move their leaves to catch their prey. So let's go through just a couple of quick ideas about mechanobiology. One is that living things are built from smaller parts that work together and on their own. So I like to think about it as like your body working like a city, right? Like how do you think about the different ways that a city works together and how might that relate to your body? Yeah?
Like every system is like layered on top of each other.
Yeah, you've got systems that are layered on top of each other. Great. And you got us started thinking about this next piece, which is that, again, there are all the levels of their structure. So, does these words ring a bell? Yeah? And what's cool about thinking about mechanobiology is that we can think about motion and movement and physical forces at all of these different levels, all the way from the organelle to the cell to the tissue to the organ system and the organism. And just like we think about that in humans and other animals, mechanobiologists also think about that for plants. But things really get exciting, as I was starting to talk about, when we start thinking about how we can use this science for new technologies in health and agriculture. So we're going to have you all explore a little bit about some of these new ideas and new research by meeting a mechanobiology researcher and learning about their work. So let me talk about what you're going to do first, and then we'll introduce you to the researchers. So again, mechanobiology is all about motion and physical forces. So we're going to use your bodies and your physical forces to learn about these new kinds of research. So each of these links take you to just like a short 2-minute video to meet a mechanobiology researcher. And you're going to watch that with your group and try to identify one phenomenon relating to mechanobiology that you hear about in their research. And then, as a group, you're going to come up with a way to act out that phenomenon. And you have to figure out a way to act it out that involves everybody in your group. All right? So then, we saw all those videos of things pushing and pulling and vibrating and pulsing. So think about how you can act out that to demonstrate it to the class.
All right, so in the second part of our activity today, we're going to zoom down even smaller. So we've been talking about what's happening with tissues, we've been talking about cells. Now we're going to go down to what we call an interface. Anybody heard the word interface before?
No.
What does that mean? What do you think that word means?
I've heard it. I forgot what it means.
Okay. And what do you?
I think it's like the beginning, like software like manual, like they're just the prep, like the intro to something.
Yeah, so you might have heard the word interface in a software context. It's like the user interface. It's like the entry point, right? When we think about it in the context of biology, we think about it as kind of like the entry point from one material to another material. So you can think about it like the boundary between two different types of materials. So if you think about cells and infection, right? The interface between the outside of the cell and the inside of the cell and how the virus can break through. You can think about it with like brain diseases like Alzheimer's, about the interface or the boundary between the inside of the cell and the outside of the cell and how diseases pass, disease molecules and proteins can affect from one to the next cell. And even at a larger scale, when you think about like hip implants, right, there's an interface between your body and then the material of the implant. So all of these kinds of boundaries between two different types of materials are what we call interfaces. So what you're going to do in this next activity is to make a model of an interface and think about how there are physical forces acting on that interface that are dependent on the actual materials that make up the two different sides of the boundary. All right, so again, we're going to make a model using, on the bottom, different mixtures of corn syrup and water. All right, you have instructions on kind of how to start experimenting with it. And then the top layer is going to be oil. Right, so between these, where do you think is the interface? Yeah, go ahead.
Right beneath the oil.
Right beneath the oil, right. So right here, the boundary between the oil and the water is what is going to be the interface. So that's going to be kind of where your attention is focused. All right, so you have an instruction sheet that will guide you through how to experiment. There are some suggested combinations of water and corn syrup. You don't have to stick to them. You can experiment with different ratios if you like. One thing as you follow the instructions, before you start mixing things in and adding them to your beakers, one important thing is just to imagine, if this is your beaker, have one person bring your beakers to this bowl of water and just like dunk the beaker and pour it out so that the inside of your beaker is already wet before you pour anything in.
Oh, okay.
All right, and we'll talk about why that's important later. All right, so you have your instructions. You can go ahead and just walk through it. And then we'll talk about what you observe. Yeah, so get all three of your beakers. Bring all three down. All right, and you're just gonna dunk them and rinse them.
Oh, so I put my hand in this.
Yep, it's just water. Yep, just dunk it, pour it out. Do the same with all three.
You should flip it upside down.
Oh, I'm not sure, like, is this supposed to be expensive? A little bit more?
So why does it say
Yeah.
First class. So observe the boundary of droplets. Yes. Rate your observations on the dish.
All right.
So you don't want it to be right by the surface.
It looked like when is it the middle?
Wait, no.
Look, it went through in the bottom. What do you see? It went through. See, look. It's not in the water. It's submerged into the layer of oil.
Are you considering your class?
So it's kind of feel like you're dipping down into the water, right?
Would you
That copyright, I'm sorry.
So it
That's nice.
It slowly, like, this is the layer, right? And it just
Yeah.
goes down and goes to it.
Add the drop. Ready?
This is like
Why you're observing that phenomenon?
I think that's all perfect.
Oh, look.
All right, so let's talk about what you observed at the interface. What did you notice happened when you had water on the bottom of the interface?
No, never mind.
Okay. Yeah.
You said water on the
Water, just water on the bottom.
Well, when we had the drop, it dropped and then it had sunk down to the bottom of the oil, but it sat on the layer in between the oil and the water. Until it turned into this.
All right, so now what do you see?
Right.
Now we see that the dye has mixed in with the water, and then the oil is sitting on top still, and it finally broke the what was the word? The term you said?
I don't recall what I said.
It broke the hold on, I got it here. The boundary.
It broke the boundary. Did people observe that in general?
Yeah.
Very nice.
All right, and then what happened when you had 100% corn syrup on the bottom? Yeah.
Like water on top?
No, oil on top, just corn syrup on the bottom.
Never mind.
Yeah.
It kind of just like sat on the top layer of oil and just started spreading out.
Yeah, so it sat there. Some of you just still have that drop of food coloring just still sitting on the corn syrup. Other folks, it spread out, so the bubble kind of burst, but it couldn't go through. So why do you think you see that difference between the water and the corn syrup? Yeah, go ahead.
Probably because it mixed with a different water, it cleans, so it ended up spreading out above the corn syrup.
Okay, so maybe there was a layer of water in between that the corn syrup and the oil. That's a good hypothesis. Why don't you think that the food coloring can drop into the corn syrup? Yeah. It's really thick, right? It's viscous. That's kind of stiffness of that liquid compared to water. So that physical force between those two is very different. So let's look at this diagram. You probably saw something like this when you first put the drop in the water, right? So here's your oil on the top, your water on the bottom, this interface, and you start to see a dip, right? Did everybody saw that dip?
I know what you're talking about.
And then over time, like they observed, that this just gets, the force of gravity keeps pulling that down, and to the point where eventually this breaks through and the drop falls down. Now, on the other hand, when you have corn syrup on the bottom, did you see that dip?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Was it as curved?
It wasn't curved.
Just a little dip, but not a curve. How about some other folks? What did you notice? Yeah.
You talking about when it was like water on top?
No, oil on top, corn syrup on the bottom. What was the shape? Oh, here's dissolved. Okay. What did others see? This group, your drop is still sitting there. It did, but only the one in the water, not the corn syrup, right? Still sitting there. So in this case, remember how we talked about how the corn syrup is much thicker?
Yes.
Right, so there's a lot more force pushing up because of the thicker liquid. So gravity can't pull it down through that. Right, so this is an example of where we can see, even at these tiny scale, how the upward force of surface tension and the properties of the liquid at the bottom are fighting against the force of gravity pulling things down. And just by changing the the materials on either side of the boundary, we can change what is happening at the boundary. Make sense?
Yes.
Yes. All right. So last thing we'll do is talk about why this actually matters. Okay. So good question. So Hamza's suggesting, what happens if we would have water on top, oil at the bottom? What do you think would happen?
So we did that for one of our experiments, right?
Uh-huh.
So my group noticed that the color drop, like eventually it mixed with the water, and I guess because of like the water concentration got much thicker because of the what are those called? The droplet, the concentrations were like equal enough for like it to just mix and become one big concentration.
So one thing you might have noticed is like, if you put the oil down on the bottom and the water was on top, did the water stay on top?
No, I think eventually the water went down.
Right. Because so there's different properties going on here, and what you observed, a property of density, that even when you add the water on top, eventually, because water is more dense than oil, it's always going to move to the bottom. And do you think that based on your observation, do you think the properties of the food coloring is more similar to water or more similar to oil? Which did it mix with? Did it mix with the oil or did it mix with the water?
Oh, it's with the water. It's more.
It mixed with the water, right. Yeah. All right, so that was a really great experiment. And so this is what scientists do, is that they actually test out building these interfaces or boundaries between different materials and different orders to experiment with what happens at the interface. So we're going to just watch one more quick video to learn about how scientists are using this.
What gets me excited about science is the absolutely incredible things that scientists are doing. They can look at one brain cell and they can look at the nerve impulse as it travels through a single neuron. It's just incredible.
Fundamental science is important because it has to come before applied science. We need to know the fundamentals of what's happening before we can start to apply that to larger systems and more applicable systems.
We are very interested in boundaries and interfaces because there's a lot of very unique science that happens at these interfaces.
So the widths of these boundaries that you're looking at in your activity are very similar to the widths of the boundaries that we're looking at in our research. Almost the size of the atoms themselves.
A lot of diseases occur due to the presence of interfaces in our bodies. The interface that we specifically care about in our lab is that interface between the outside of the cell, where that cell membrane is touching the liquid. Whenever you get sick from the flu, there is a virus that is binding to the surface of your cells. And it's because of the surface properties that this virus can bind. We are looking at neurodegenerative disorders, and we believe that the fundamental way that these diseases progress is via surface interactions between copper or other metal ions with the very surface of this cell membrane.
I'm looking at how metal ions bind to this model membrane. So for example, copper, nickel, zinc, looking to see how these metal ions are able to bind to this kind of like a toy system.
What happens when we put different kinds of membranes in? Does that make the binding stronger or does it make it weaker? If we put different kinds of membranes in, does that help the membrane to stop from getting destroyed? It's extraordinarily helpful with medicines.
All right. So you heard from these researchers about how being able to build models of these interfaces and test them is a way that they can design new kinds of medicine. Oops. What was that? And think about how do you test the properties of these boundaries to understand what's happening in different diseases? So what you see in the diagram on the left is actually how they build that interface. So they have that support on the bottom. Then they, just like you built in your model, a layer of water and then a layer of a model cell membrane. And they can test all of these different metals and things and how they're interacting with the interface. So hopefully what we've done today kind of gives you an idea of, at the really small scale, about how scientists are trying to investigate all of these different physical forces that are affecting our bodies and plants and animals at a super, super tiny level, from cells and tissues all the way down to these interfaces between membranes and what happens outside.